Send your Spirit, God, to open our hearts and our minds to your word and strengthen us to live according to your will. In Jesus' name. My wife Kathy and I have lived in Washington, D.C. for almost 3 years now, yet the locals there never cease asking me how I am adjusting to life in the district after having grown up in Los Angeles. It's really not a problem, I answer. Hollywood and Washington are exactly the same culture. So I'm very much at home here. As you can imagine, this is not a popular answer inside the Beltway, but it is a true one. Washingtonians may think of themselves as civil servants and diplomats, but from what I've seen of them so far, they behave pretty much like network executives and theatrical agents. Both Hollywood and Washington are one-industry towns. Indeed, both cities refer to themselves as this town, as in, you'll never eat lunch in this town again, or seasoned politicos see trouble brewing for policy analysts in this town. And when you think about it, show business and politics are really twin branches of one enterprise. They're both about packaging a person and projecting an image. Everything in one city is about glitz and hype, and you can say exactly the same thing about Los Angeles. I hope they're not watching this on So growing up in LA and around Hollywood has actually been an asset for me, especially when it comes to reading people. Well-known Washingtonians remember their Hollywood cousins, especially in their personal love for hiddenness. In public, they are often nothing like they are in private. My father was an actor, and his public and private personae could not have been more different from each other. Politicians are pretty much the same. They project a public image that has almost nothing in common with how they are when the microphones and the cameras disappear. In some sense, politicians and actors only read back to us the public-private discontinuity that we all inhabit. Who are we in company and who we are when we are alone? I thought about this public-private disjunction a lot, especially as I've contemplated the gospel for today, because this disjunction is perhaps our greatest spiritual problem, especially in this social media age. But we humans were this way even before the advent of Twitter. We expect actors and politicians to wear masks. That's what they do. And at least they know the benefits and the risks they're taking when they do it. But what about the rest of us? In today's reading, Mark, in his gospel, tells us how, after a whirlwind of teaching and healing, Jesus and his companions decide to come away to a deserted place and to rest for a while. But the crowd sees them do that, and they follow the Jesus group to their refuge. Jesus is tired, and he is entitled to be cranky. But here is the difference between Jesus and the rest of us, or at least between Jesus and me. Jesus does not throw a hissy fit. When cornered in private, Jesus responds as he had in public, not in anger, but in love. He doesn't tell them to come back during office hours. He has compassion on the crowd because they seem to him, in Mark's words, like sheep without a shepherd. So Jesus heals and teaches them. He does in private what he had been doing in public. So for Jesus, there is no Greta Garbo like I want to be alone moment here. Jesus is who he is. He'll heal you in public. He'll heal you in private. He is who he is. He is a unified self in both arenas. He does not have a public act and a private one. He is one coherent human person who actually knows who he is and behaves consistently all the time and with everyone. This doesn't mean that he's always cheerful or happy, but he is never bogus. He knows who he is, and he invites you into a zone of compassion and love, a space of healing and peace, a space where you can know and be who you are also. Now, you'd think that knowing who you are and being that person consistently, you'd think that that would be pretty easy. But in fact, it is actually one of the hardest things we ever attempt to do. Growing up in the hothouse of the family or the school or peer group, as infants and children, we often develop a false self in response to the rewards and punishments we receive from parents and other authority figures. This false self has its place. It helps us navigate the rapids of adolescence and early adulthood, and it helps us eventually get out of the house. But there comes a time later in life, a personal, relationship, or professional crisis, when that false self is no longer adequate to the demands of the situation. And what we call this midlife crisis is often simply the breaking up of that false self and the opportunity to discover and act out of our real identity. By being who he was, both in public and in private, Jesus exemplifies for us, his followers, what it means to be a fully realized human being. The great Roman Catholic monk and writer Thomas Merton, whom I talked about in the forum last hour, puts it this way. Merton says, "We are at liberty to be real or to be unreal." He says, "We may be true or false, the choice is ours. We may wear now one mask and now another, and never, if we so desire, appear with our own true face. But we cannot make these choices with impunity," he goes on. "Causes have effects, and if we lie to ourselves and to others, then we cannot expect to find truth and reality wherever we happen to want them. If we have chosen the way of falsity, we must not be surprised that truth eludes us when we finally come to need it." It is no accident that Thomas Merton learned about true and false selves while living in a monastery. Monastic community looks peaceful from the outside, but it is the most intense kind of living there is. And there's no place to hide when you're with your brothers or your sisters 24 hours a day. But monasteries don't only offer intense community. They also have what we call a rule of life, a monastic commitment to balancing prayer and study and work and rest and play in a holistic structure that allows one to experience the fullness of God's presence in the routine round of the everyday. You can't survive in a monastery very long if you're always wearing a mask. The pressure there is just too intense. So one of the ways you learn to live monastically is to relax and accept your identity within a shared structure. As a contemporary monk and writer, Curtis Almquist of the Cowley Fathers in Cambridge, Massachusetts says, "Benedict's monastic rule is for a 24/7 living experience, nothing pie in the sky." Almquist says, if this is what you say you believe and value, then how do you live this out in the course of the day? The end of Benedictine spirituality is to develop a transparent personality. What Curtis Almquist says of the Benedictine rule for monks and nuns could be said of the Christian life itself for you and me. The end of following Jesus is to develop a transparent personality. Jesus went into the wilderness seeking rest, and he found people there who needed him. In his most private moment, he was who he was, and he responded with the compassion he exhibited in public. Jesus was one unified, seamless person. He had what Almquist would call a transparent personality. He did not have what Merton would call a false self. You and I can have a transparent personality too. But to get that transparent personality, we have to work at it. We can start by adopting a rule of life, a commitment to working and playing and resting and praying in a definable rhythm. We can continue by deciding, in Thomas Merton's words, no longer to lie to ourselves or to others. That decision is one that LGBT people have shown straight people like me how to make over the last decades. It's a decision that people of color and women and oppressed people have shown white men like me to make over the last centuries. The step into liberation is the same, whatever social location you're in. It is the central act of following Jesus. I am no longer to lie to myself or to others. I am going to be who I am in all environments, regardless of the discomfort that may cause. This decision no longer to lie to ourselves or to others is one that each of us faces on a daily basis. It is a choice we can put off, but it is one we can never finally avoid. It is one that we can be strengthened to make only in community with Jesus and with one another. And that is why we need the church. That is why Christianity is not a solo act. The church is really a kind of laboratory for authentic living. We need to come in and hear the stories of how Jesus lived and what Jesus stood for. We need to come into a place like this and try on being our authentic selves with one another. We need to come into a place like this and remember that we, like Jesus, are called to love and transform the world. We need to come in so that we all may go out. You don't have to be 2 or 5 or 16 people to get through life. You only have to be one, the precious, unique, fragile person created in God's image and loved and redeemed by Jesus. We come in to go out. It will be time soon enough to navigate the rapids of this town, whichever coast you may find it on. But for now, we are here with divine permission to be who we are. And we come now to this table. May the grace and the acceptance we find here empower us to try on being who we really are, so that with practice we can offer our true selves to the world. Trust what happens here. The world needs the real you. Nobody needs your public relations version of you. Everyone needs you as you really, finally are. This is not the conventional wisdom of Hollywood. It is not the conventional wisdom of Washington. It is probably not the conventional wisdom of any place else. But it is the truth. And for it, we now gather together to give thanks. Amen.